Hi, I'm Yesim Nicholson. Welcome back to another episode of Your Big Career Move. One of the questions that I get asked all the time is, how do you find guests for your podcast? And the answer is it really varies. Like sometimes I'll read about somebody somewhere that I think they've got a really fascinating story to tell. Other times people will contact me and say, please, can I just share my story? I think it's a good one. I think your audience will like it. So it really does vary. And sometimes I'll be walking along a beach in Sunderland and come across, I have to say, from a distance, I didn't know what I was coming across. All I saw was in the distance two people with what looked like from a distance long sticks doing something in the sand. And I'm naturally quite a curious person, so I had to go and find out what was going on. And that's how I met Claire. And Claire was very kind and agreed to some random woman coming up to her on the beach, asking her a million questions, and was very kind to accept my invitation to be on this podcast. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Claire. And you were with your son on the date, so we'll definitely talk about him at some point. But what really piqued my interest is obviously what you were doing in the sand, but then also I found out a tiny, tiny glimpse into your backstory. So shall we start with what you were doing before you started doing something wonderful in the sand? And you can explain what I mean by that in a minute.
Hi there, yes, and thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be to find I can tell my story a little bit through yourself. So on that particular day, I was creating a huge great white shark, and that was basically to promote some new sneakers that Nike were promoting, and they had decided that because it was a shark, it sat very well on a coastal environment. And they got us to wear the sneakers that they were selling and asked us to create a huge shark to mark the launch. And that's what you discovered, a great white shark.
Yeah. And it was rather well, actually, I couldn't tell on the day quite how fabulous it was, but I've since seen you post it on social media and it really was fabulous. And the reason that we didn't get to talk very long on the day is because you literally you were on a time limit because the tide was coming in and
Yeah.
you were very polite and told me to go away.
I
So
hope
you
it
could
didn't come
finish
across
it.
quite like that.
I'm
Oh,
just pulling your leg. You were very polite, but I could see that the tide was coming in. And I
yeah.
mean, that must be a constant challenge. But so tell us what you were doing before you started to create these wonderful things in the sand.
Before working on the beach, I had a very conventional job as a GP. And I'd been a GP for 25 years and a doctor for 30 years. So quite a long time of sitting behind a desk, basically. And then you found me on the beach, and the journey to get there took a little bit of doing. And it was essentially a relaxation activity that gradually became more. And then it's now become quite a commercial activity, and I've been able to allow my son to join in and gather some new skills as well.
Yeah, I love that. How did you get into medicine in the first place? Was that a calling for you from a very young age, or what was your path into medicine?
As a kid, my family had always encouraged an interest in science as well as art. And like a lot of youngsters, I was fascinated by animals primarily. So my interest was to go into veterinary medicine. But then as a teenager, I became more interested in people and what they thought and psychology. And that, combined with the interest in science, led me into medicine. But it did take a while, and I have to admit, it took 3 attempts to get into medical school. So
Gosh,
it wasn't an easy thing for me at all.
what made you not give up?
Because I really, really wanted to do it. And in those days, a girl wanting to do something like that was a little bit unusual. And my school wasn't prepared for girls wanting to go into medicine. It would be very different today. So attempts 1 and 2 were not successful, but I just felt that I had something to give and that I should do it. And I'm really glad that I did because it was an incredible career.
Yeah. But you must be quite a tenacious person to keep going at it, even if the odds were stacked against you. What
Yeah, yeah,
you said that you were really glad that you got into medicine,
yes.
and then I'm guessing somewhere along the line that your feeling towards medicine changed. Can you talk us through what happened? What was the catalyst?
Yeah, I think around 2015, that sense of joy and the creativity, the art of being a doctor became much less apparent. And between 2015, 2018, there was a shift. And I found that as like a lot of people, as they become well established in an occupation, they start to wear more hats and take on more responsibility. And this is done with a certain level of skill. And so another hat is added to it. And then eventually you're wearing so many hats that you can't keep your head up very well. And you realize that you're kind of spreading yourself too thinly. And it's almost too late to do anything about that. Taking off the hats is a lot harder than putting the hats on. And so I got to the point, and it was like a lot of things in life where there's something else happening that makes you really consider your position. And so at that point, my mum was coming to the end of her life, and I was dealing with that and thinking maybe this is a time for me to think about the next 10, 15 years for myself. Do I really want to keep putting this amount of energy in and not feeling that I'm giving the patients what they want? And so that personal difficulty became the point where I became uncomfortable. And I think this sense of being uncomfortable is actually really important. And
Mm.
it's an engine for change. And so that was the point where I thought I'm going to plan for early retirement. So I had 18 months before I was 55, and I thought that is going to be the point where I'm going to end my medical career and see what happens next.
Very strategic. I like it. I just want to go back
Mm.
to something that you just said, that you felt like you couldn't give your patients what they wanted. What does that
Yes.
mean?
Well, up until that particular point, the relationship of a GP with patients is very personal. It's a prolonged one. You walk with them through generations, basically, because traditionally GPs would always be in that one practice, and that's what was expected. It's like a marriage,
Yeah.
or it used to be very much like a marriage. And I found that over time, for a whole host of reasons, that the the expectations and the demands increased, and some of those demands were external from things like NHS England and the CQC and various bodies of authority, and then some of them were the patients themselves. For example, we were experiencing a population that was aging with more complex diseases and more treatments. So the number of interactions with patients needed to increase, but the time was the same. You're just one person. And so that began to contract. And it was really not satisfying having a 5 minute consultation with a person because inevitably you're thinking about the next person coming in. And there's no way that you can drill down and find what the issue is for that particular person. People come with more than one problem. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that you're not going to deliver what's needed.
Yeah.
And that lack of delivery, that lack of ability to deliver meant that the patient satisfaction became less and the sense of doing something useful became less.
Am I right in assuming that you probably weren't the only practitioner that felt that way?
Yes. And I think, although I felt it then, I think what has happened within the NHS is very evident now. And so I often compare it to an ability to see that we were going over a waterfall in 2018. And I got away from the edge of that waterfall, but we are well and truly over that that edge. And it's I keep thinking, hopefully things will change. Everything goes round in cycles, and there's hope. There's hope for change. But at my point in the career, it was time to do something different.
Yeah. Do you still have colleagues you're still in touch with who are still within the NHS?
Yes, yes, I still do. A number have left because they'd be about the same age as me, but there are still plenty still in, and I know how hard it is for them. They're doing an incredible job trying to deliver, and it just isn't, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's a shame because it's an amazing job. And I experience things that I wouldn't have experienced in any other job. And I'm really pleased that I had the opportunity to do it for so long.
Yeah.
30 years is amazing.
Yeah. It's so nice to hear you speak about your previous career like that, because I think when I speak to clients, one of the things that comes up again and again is that they've invested all this time and energy and money and they've invested their life basically in a career. And then when they get to a point where it feels like it's not serving them anymore, like you did to an extent, then they fear this that they're letting go of something that they've invested so much into. And
Yes.
I hope that hearing you come out on the other end and being able to look back on your first career with such positivity, I think is really inspiring. It sounds like you were very strategic in the way that you sort of exited your career. Can you talk us through how did you plan it all? Did you do it all by yourself? Did you put together spreadsheets? Was it very strategic, or did you sort of have a rough plan and then just went for it?
Well, I think one of you can't avoid the practicalities like finance. There are bills to be paid, and you have to think, how are you going to pay these bills with a significantly reduced income? What are you going to do? So within that 18 months, it was a period of thinking, well, what do I need? What do I not need? Paying off certain bills and also reducing direct debits, shrinking. And and it's quite cathartic in a way to think about. It's a bit like cleaning out your cupboards and
Yeah.
taking things to the tip. You think, oh, that's great. Got rid of all that stuff that I don't need and recycle what you can. And so it's a bit of very useful housekeeping and a kind of psychological, financial, practical housekeeping. That was a significant part of that approaching D-Day and letting go. But then also you have to psychologically prepare because if you've been in a career for a long time, it is part of your identity. You see yourself as a doctor, as a GP. What are you going to see yourself? What are other people going to see yourself as?
Yeah.
And that was one of the things. How will people interact? Will they still want to know me?
Mhm.
Because in a small town, inevitably, the fact that you're a doctor blurs into every single other relationship, whether it's your hairdresser, the window cleaner, the garage, schools, everybody will ask you medical questions. It's inevitable, and so it even in the supermarket, it was part of life. And and
So
then
please,
suddenly,
while you're buying your carrots, may I just ask you?
yeah, yeah, seriously, it was a little town, and we were a big practice, so it
Mhm.
was just part of life, and I accepted that.
Mhm.
And then you have to think, well, how is that part of your life? You're not going to be legally able to share. You can give advice with caveats, but you cannot. You're not going to be have the same insurance. Your education will be different. You're going down a different path, so you have to adjust psychologically as well.
How did you do that? Adjust psychologically.
Well, preparing myself and beginning to sort of gradually pull away a little bit and be a little bit more cautious about the interactions and how much I could offer externally. Um, so it was a slow process of stepping back
Mhm.
and
What did stepping back mean to you?
stepping back, I suppose, meaning that when people were wanting to initiate a medical conversation in a non-medical context, uh, I would sometimes simply have to say, I'm not really, I haven't got the time to be able to do that safely. And so I would add, if you'd like to make an appointment, then we can talk about this safely in that context. But of course, the appointments were getting fewer and further in between. So that was my safety net
Mhm.
to try to establish a sense of being somebody else.
How did that feel then, from being the person that people would stop in the supermarket to then having to put up almost a bit of a barrier? How did that feel? Was it liberating or did you feel rude doing it? Or what were the feelings that you were experiencing?
Well, two big things happened at that point that were totally unexpected, and that sort of forced my hand. And one of those was the end of my marriage very abruptly, and that created a sense of needing to move away. And so that's why I had been working in Nottinghamshire
Hmm.
and made the decision to move to the northeast.
Hmm.
So that was one thing. But that process in itself took over a year. But the other big thing that happened within 3 months of me retiring was COVID arrived. And then all of the changes that happened with COVID created a natural separation of myself and the community around me. And there's no way that I could have expected it, but it kind of made it easier, that sense of being a different person. And
Yeah. Gosh, it sounds like a lot of change happened in a very short period of time.
everything happened within it was almost overnight and it
Gosh.
was quite dramatic. So there
Mm.
was quite a lot to adjust to.
Yeah.
But I think if anything comes out of this story, it shows that change doesn't have to be feared and it can actually it can be the vehicle that can transport you from an uncomfortable situation into something that you cannot imagine and is entirely positive. So I don't regret any of it now, although at the time it wasn't fun.
Did you feel fearful at the time?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are so many. I think change for human beings is a huge fear, change per se, because there's comfort in whatever is known, and change in the unknown is definitely something that people find quite anxiety provoking.
Hmm.
But I think when change is inevitable, as it was, it's acknowledging that, accepting it, and think trying to reframe it and think, well, here comes that uncomfortable feeling. I don't like it, but this is the engine for getting me to wherever I'm going. And I I see things I see that discomfort in a very different way, and I try to convey that to family members and other people who are struggling with it.
Yeah. And amazing that you're able to convey that from first-hand experience. You're not just talking about it theoretically. You've been
Yeah,
there, you've done that, you got the t-shirt,
yeah,
and here
yeah.
you are, still smile. Well, not still smiling, but smiling. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was one of the unexpected things in life that the tough times are absolutely inevitable, but they don't stay tough. And then you come out of the other side. I'm not going to say always, but a lot of the time you will come out of the other side into a much brighter, better place. And that is exactly what's happened. So if it can happen to myself, it can happen to other people.
well, sometimes the universe gives us a little shove, doesn't it, when we do need to make a change. Do you mind me asking about your marriage?
Sure.
Where did that come in the timeline of you deciding that you're going to retire early and actually retiring?
It came on the night of my retirement party.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
you said it was totally out of the blue.
yes, yeah. The marriage hadn't been. How can I say it? It hadn't been totally happy for some time. But then I could see lots of people in middle age in a very similar sort of situation. And was spectacular.
Yeah,
And so that then rolled into and there were other things happening with family members not being very well. So it was a very, very complicated time.
yeah.
rolled into COVID. Not surprisingly, there was an episode of quite significant ill health for myself, but moved through that within a year, had moved away, begun to establish a new life, and had a new home, reconnected with old school friends, reconnected better relationships with family in the area. And that was the turning point. So brutal, but really good stuff has come out of it. Really good stuff.
Amazing. And I mean, the timing's interesting, isn't it? Because I wonder how, if your marriage had broken down, let's say 2 years prior to it actually breaking down, what influence would you think that would have had on you taking early retirement?
That's a really interesting one. I think the decision to retire needed to be made for the NHS reasons. Um, but I probably would have stayed in the area, probably at that particular point, simply maybe because we would have gone our separate ways, of course, and I would have had to establish a new home. So it would have been a different trajectory, very different.
Mm.
So again, I get back to the idea of being in a very uncomfortable position, horrible, but actually, she did me a favor.
Yeah. In hindsight, it probably didn't
Yeah,
feel like it at the time. And then
yes, I should shake her
financially,
hand.
I mean, that's quite a big thing to happen. Separating is going to affect both parties financially.
Yes, yeah,
How did that impact you? I mean, were you suddenly like, oh my God, we're going to break up, we're going to split our finances, and I've just left a really secure job with the NHS?
yes. I mean, if it's a very luxurious position to be in to have such a lot of experience in medicine because it meant that if I needed to, I could still do locums. I could have continued with work if I really, really wanted to. Um, but everything was pointing to a big change, and I was happy to downsize, have less holidays, and see what happened. And the key things were focusing on health, focusing on a sense of contentment and honesty, and doing something with my energy that resonated with people in a good way.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Finally, let's get to we get to talk about what you are now doing, which I find so awesome. I've been showing everybody I know. I'm like, look at this. This is so
Oh,
cool.
thank you.
I
Thank
get
you
very
so much.
enthusiastic about things very easily.
Ah,
But seriously, what you're doing, I think, is just really wonderful. So do tell us what it is you're doing.
but basically, what it is scaling up paper pictures onto the beach and using a rake instead of a pencil to do the drawing, and then viewing it using drones. So from the ground, as you discovered yourself, you can't really make out what it is. It looks like disturbed sand of some sort. But
Mhm.
then that elevated view with the drone, that's the magic. And it transforms something that you can't make out into crystal clarity. And this huge image, which if you have people next to it, you get a sense of scale, and they're usually, most of them are about 20 meters by 30 meters, sometimes
Yeah,
a
they're
bit
huge.
bigger. They
Yeah.
are huge things. Yeah.
So
And
how did
what's,
you get into this? Because it's not a natural progression, is it? It's not,
you know,
oh, I was a GP and now I'm a locum, or now I don't know, I'm a school nurse, or do you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
it's so different. How
it
did
is
you get
so
into
good.
this?
As a kid, the family had always encouraged art, so I did a lot of drawing and basic photography with a cheap old box brownie camera. So they had been um, interest going through life. And then as a student, I did some big art on a summer camp in America, did one of those Camp America experiences. And that made me it planted the seed of big art is possible.
Mm.
Then, when my kids came along, we did art in the garden. We used bed sheets and sprayed them and painted them. We used old wallpaper rolls to create big freezers. We actually painted the grass to celebrate one of the jubilees in the lawn, and it was huge. We made a huge Union Jack
Oh,
painted
amazing.
on the grass. So big art has been part of what I've done with the kids. Did a bit of messing about in sand with the kids. Then we'd go and stand on a seawall, look at what we'd done. And then the real turning point was the end of the celebrations to mark the end of World War One. And Danny Boyle created these wonderful installations around the country with the faces of fallen servicemen etched into the sand by teams of volunteers. So that was the year before I retired. And I was blown away by the fact that you could make a human face recognizable in the sand. And I thought, what else can you do? And then from there, dabbled, refined, made loads of mistakes. People wanted to have their own drawing. They found their own purposes for me to translate. So, and that's been a lovely thing to gradually build something that I did for relaxation. I did get a drone along the way. That was the essential thing. And so, getting the drone, getting the license, allowing me to have that freedom legally, that was the turning point.
So cool. And so people started to notice the art
Yeah,
and were
yeah.
amazed at it, like I was. And then how do you turn that into a business?
Well, starting off with very low prices, obviously, because it was in its infancy at that particular point. And then gradually, bigger names got involved and bigger organizations. I needed more kit and more sophisticated camera work, more sophisticated editing. So all of these things have costs, but they have to be built up gradually because otherwise you're going to be very much out of pocket. And my idea in it initially was to break even. And so long as the kit was paid for and the insurance was paid for by enough infrequent customers, that was fine. And also to keep it fun as well. I wanted to keep it fun.
Hmm.
Gradually, bigger names have got involved, and I've been able to offer them more, especially since my son has joined, because he has his own technical skills and he brings that youthful knowledge to marketing. And so now it's just beginning to get a little bit of traction, and we can offer something a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah. And I mean, now you've got big brands like Foot Locker and Nike getting in touch. I mean, that's phenomenal.
It is, and so unexpected. And I pinch myself every day thinking, how lucky am I to have this new life and never know what's going to come in on a particular day. All the days are different, and I just love it.
To what extent do you think you manifested it? I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about the word manifest? And
Mm.
do you think that you've created this, or do you feel like it's just landed in your lap?
I'm really lucky to have a lot of energy and good health now, and I think that helps enormously when you've got um, a passion for something, because it is really quite physical, these things. So you
Mhm.
have to um, there's physical and mental effort. But I think in terms of manifesting it, it's I didn't actually have a plan for the artwork, but I'm curious and happy to see where it goes and curious to see what kind of purpose people might imagine for it. And I like the idea of this organic flow with a commercial head on because the bills have to be paid, but also just to see what happens next.
Does it create more pressure now that your son's joined? Because I gather that he left his job. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I remember him saying he was in a sales role. Is
Yes, he
that
wasn't
right?
a salesman.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so he quit his job to join you. So does that add an element of pressure to earn a certain amount of money now?
Yeah, I mean, so he quit his job and he took up another job that looked as if it was going to suit him, but it really, really, it wasn't. So at that particular point, I could have done with another pair of hands, but with a specific skill set.
Hmm.
And he had that skill set in terms of the art background, a lifetime of doing big art, and also the marketing and the sales and the patience with it. So he was ideal at that point. But of course, because he needs to be paid, it does generate a degree of pressure. But that's okay. I'm in a place of life now where I've got still got lots of energy and I quite like that challenge.
Hmm.
And there's always a bit of a risk. He understands that risk. He can move off at any particular time, so he can, and I'm sure he will eventually move on to something else. But right now, he's gaining all kinds of very unusual skills and enjoying it and discovering which direction he wants to go in life as well. So we're both transitioning at the same time.
Yeah. How old is he now, Claire?
He's just turned 27.
27.
Yeah.
What's it like working with your 27-year-old son?
Well, he left home when he was 18. And so it's getting to know him in a different way as an adult as opposed to a teenager.
Mhm.
And being astonished in, as mothers will often be, that their youngster can do certain things that they weren't expecting. And he will tell me when I'm doing things wrong, which is a good thing as well.
Like what?
Oh, the technical things where I'm making a meal of getting from A to B with the technical things, and he will say, "Well, why don't you do it like this?" And
Mhm.
he'll do something very quick, and so I'm learning from him, and I
Yeah.
accept that my methods are a bit long-winded and inefficient a lot of the time.
It's quite nice though. You probably balance each other out quite nicely that you come with an experience that he doesn't have, and he comes with a completely fresh set of skills that perhaps don't come naturally to you. I think that's quite
Yes,
wonderful, isn't it?
yeah, it
My
is.
13-year-old daughter tells me I do everything wrong. Not everything wrong, but
Oh, yes.
especially when she looks at my YouTube, she's like, no, Mum, no, no, that's not how you do it.
But
It's
it's
kind of
great,
like
isn't it, to
they
have
were
that?
born knowing these things somehow.
Yes, they were, and the things that it takes us. Well, you're in a very different generation to me, but it just takes an adult much longer than a very young person to pick up these skills.
Yeah, it's almost second nature to them, isn't it? That they just know
Yeah.
what to do. They pick up a phone or a tablet or a laptop and they just know.
Yes.
It's quite
Yeah.
incredible, really.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you miss about being a GP?
Well, I had an amazing team around me, and it was a big team as well. So I do miss the interactions and the banter. But having said that, I see a number of them intermittently, and I'm still in touch, whether it's face to face or whether it's WhatsApps, things like that. So we follow each other's lives, and it's good.
Yeah.
And of course, the patients, when you've known the patients for a quarter of a century,
Mm.
you really become part of their families a lot of the time, and accepting that you can't do that anymore. It's not your place to even necessarily ask, and you haven't got a way of being in contact. It's
Mm.
quite a severance. So accepting that you're in a different chapter is part of that letting go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess making new friends and creating new connections with people in a new place, I guess, is quite fun as well, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, yeah, it is. And I think having moved geographically, it lends itself to that anyway, and sort of amplifies that freshness.
Yeah.
Although a lot of change all very quickly, it brings its own stress, but it also is a line in the sand, quite literally in my
Yeah.
case.
It's quite literally in your case. Does being a doctor ever really leave you? And what I mean by that is, will you still listen to medical, I don't know, podcasts, for example, that are about medicine? Do you still educate yourself on health and well-being? Or is that something that you feel like, no, you've just left it behind now?
Well, the fact that I've got more time allows me to do that. And so that interest that was always there as a young person, it doesn't go. And I'm fascinated by the new developments and what's happening within the NHS. And my daughter has gone into medicine, so she's a junior doctor, and we have
Gosh.
lots of conversations about what she sees and how it's done now. And so I feel that I'm living this medical life by proxy through her now.
That's really interesting. And so I don't know how to ask this question without sounding really negative, but
Yeah,
I'm just curious because obviously before you retired, you were starting to feel a little bit disenfranchised with how the NHS was operating and how much time you could give your patients. Did that, I guess that didn't influence your daughter in a negative way or not enough for her not to follow in your footsteps?
I didn't want to share all that negative stuff with her because I know everything goes around in circles. And I thought by the time she comes out of the other end, things will be different. She will be trained differently. Her expectations will be different. And sure enough, she's really enjoying it at this
Yes.
particular point. Yeah, and I think that's lovely that the young doctors have, because they have a different approach, their expectations of the NHS are different from an older doctor's expectations. And so they'll carry it on and they'll develop it in their own way.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I love hearing people who are in the NHS and actually really enjoying it because, gosh, we need as many people in the medical profession as we possibly can, especially now.
Yes.
Um, like the education sector as well, because I do work with a lot of people that are leaving both of those sectors, and it's very bittersweet for me because I obviously love working with people to find what might be next for them. But I
Yeah.
also have this like, oh gosh, please stay, please stay in this caring profession because clearly you felt this calling and you're good at what you do. And please don't be disillusioned by, the admin or whatever the red tape around the work. So it's really nice to hear. I love hearing that people like being part of the NHS. It's
Yeah.
really gives us hope, doesn't it?
It does.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that I always ask my guests is what their
Mm.
definition of success is now and how it differs from maybe 10 or 20 years ago.
Oh, it's completely different now. I think the younger version of myself would have seen success a lot as academic achievements in order to progress up the medical ladder. And also a bit ashamed to say material success that I viewed as important then in terms of setting up a house and establishing what's needed within a house. And um,
Mind me asking why you feel ashamed of that?
well, I don't. I think maybe I chased the material things a little bit too hard,
Hmm.
and perhaps that would have been something that I could have given myself uh, a little time to reflect on why that was happening,
Hmm.
and all important things to have that stability. I recognize that, and I love uh, sort of nice quality things still, but I think the things that I would value, judge as success now are different at this end of my career in the sense that it would be things that resonated positively, so more in less tangible things.
Hmm.
So more to do with the impact of what you do on other people and how that makes them feel rather than the physical types of things, which is it's quite a huge change. But I think I've got the luxury of having had a very secure career that's allowed me to do that. And it's so my framing now can't be compared to somebody who hasn't had that security of
Yeah.
jobs and finance. It's the different worlds.
Hmm. And what's your definition now, would you say, of success?
Trying to pass on something positive.
Hmm.
So the kind of work that I do, trying to deliver something that is meaningful to the individual or the organization, and that they are pleased with, that represents what their original aim was, and maybe adds something that they weren't expecting in a good way as well. So it's that sense of, it's a little bit like patient satisfaction. It's a client satisfaction. And the weird thing is, there are lots of transferable things from the old world of convention into this new world of non-convention that I couldn't have dreamed of. But that sense of satisfaction is definitely one of them.
Isn't that nice? And I suppose that's reflected in the name of your business, which is Soul to Sand,
Yes.
which suggests it's about more than just the artwork. Where did the name
Yeah.
come from?
Well, it came from a lot of people wanting a memorial for a loved one. And some of the people actually brought down ashes to the beach to create their own ceremony. So, although it's not exclusively about memorials, that sense of distilling what was important to the person into the sand lent itself to the idea of soul to sand.
How wonderful. Anybody watching or listening to this right now, please go and check out Claire's Instagram, which is soul and then the number two sand. I mean, the images on there are really phenomenal.
Mhm.
I got lost. I went down a rabbit hole looking at your
Oh,
Instagram
thank
feed.
you.
I'm not a huge fan of social media, which I probably shouldn't admit to, but I really loved looking on your profile and seeing all the beautiful artwork that you've been creating over the last few years. Wonderful, really, really lovely. And
Thank you.
I have to say that one thing that really struck me about our very brief encounter at the beach in Sunderland, which is where my family's from, and the cat and dog steps, which were just
Yeah.
above where you were creating the art, have a very special place in my family's history. My grandparents used to live up the road from there, so my granddad used to go down those steps pretty much every single day. And he was an athlete, so he would do his exercises at the beach, which probably people do now, but in the olden days, he used to get a lot of strange looks. But that was, I guess, his happy place, and it's a happy place for a lot of our family members. But I've gone completely off tangent because what I was going to say is when we had our brief encounter at the beach, um, I have to say the pride that I saw in your son's eyes was talking about you. And that's actually because I spoke to him before you then joined us, and
Yes.
he was, I don't know, it was really, really wonderful to see just how proud he was of you.
Oh, that's
So I hope
lovely.
he tells you in person, but just in case he doesn't, it was really very, very evident.
Well, that is lovely to know because it can be a difficult thing for sons to express things like that.
Yeah.
And
Well, maybe they can to strangers, random strangers on the beach. Because he certainly
oh,
did. He
thank you for
made it
telling
very
me
clear.
that.
Yeah. And I just think what you guys are doing together is really wonderful. And I really appreciate you sharing your story today because I know that there'll be somebody listening who's been in the same career for a long time, who's got a reputation, who's built an identity around their career, who really wants to do something else, but is perhaps too fearful or they don't really know what they want to do. And I think the takeaway from our conversation is experiment with things that give you joy outside of work. And your art clearly does that for you. And the fact that you've now been able to make it into something that's creating a bit of revenue for you and hopefully will continue to do so in the future is, I think, very inspiring. So I hope there's at least one person out there listening to this who is really inspired by your story, Claire. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And thank you so much for having me. Been lovely to share it.
Been such a pleasure. Thank you. Just before you go, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for listening. And secondly, this podcast has grown purely through word of mouth. So if you think you know somebody that might enjoy this episode, I'd be super grateful if you could share it with them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then please do, because that will mean that you won't miss any future episodes. And finally, if you're curious about making your own career change, then you might like to join my online group coaching program, which I run on a regular basis. It's named after my book, Ready to Quit Your Job. And I also offer some one-to-one coaching as well. You can find out more about both on my website, which is yescareercoaching.com. Thanks a lot.